Virgin Voyages are well known for their iconic Caribbean itineraries, but personally for me, some of my favourite voyages have been those that go out of the European ports like Barcelona and Athens. And it's a completely unique experience to be sailing with Virgin Voyages in Europe compared to across the Atlantic. So today I thought I'd share some essential tips that you'll need to know if you're sailing with Virgin Voyages in Europe, including picking the right ship for your itinerary, how and when to tip, what to do with those later port days and those overnights, and crucially what you need to know about cruising in Europe on Virgin Voyages. If we haven't met before, my name is David from VV Insider, which is a website that's all about Virgin Voyages, including all the information, the guides and the news that you're going to need to know if you're heading on board the Virgin Voyages ships. We pride ourselves on knowing everything there is to know about Virgin Voyages, and because of that, we've got some crucial tips that you'll definitely want to know if you're heading to Europe either this year, 2027, or recently announced 2028, including some very intriguing news about where they might be headed in 2028, so stick around for that. So there's lots to go through, so let's jump right in, starting with tip number 1, which is all about picking the itinerary over the ship. The Virgin Voyages ships are very, very similar, and actually the biggest changes you're going to notice are down to the entertainment and one of the restaurants. So really what you want to do is make sure you pick an itinerary that matches what you want to do with your vacation. To help you understand itineraries from Europe, really all you need to know is that there are 2 home ports. The first one is Barcelona in Spain and the other is Athens in Greece. And really, wherever you're heading from is going to set the tone for the rest of your voyage. If you choose a sailing out of Barcelona, expect to go to places like the Balearic Islands in Spain. You'll probably also be visiting Italy and France. Alternatively, if you choose to leave from Athens, generally it's either going to be a Greek island cruise, or you'll be going up to the Adriatic visiting Croatia and Montenegro. These 2 options of home ports give you 2 very different types of experiences, but the general format of the itinerary will be similar. You'll be hopping either from island to island or port to port, and then you'll have an overnight generally towards the end of your voyage. Again, if you're heading out of Barcelona, your overnight will be in Ibiza, or if you're heading out from Athens, your overnight will be in Mykonos. These 2 overnight ports are generally quite well known for their nightlife and clubbing. Ibiza leans a little bit more heavily into the club scene, where Mykonos is more bars and restaurants. But both of these ports are really lovely to explore in the daytime as well, with old towns to go and visit with souvenir shopping and great dining, as well as a number of excursions to see historical sites as well. So it's not just all about the nightlife. Apart from those standard cruises from Barcelona and Athens, you might see the odd diversion in the itinerary schedule, especially one that's coming up in 2028, where Valiant Lady has a bit of a large gap in her normal itineraries from Barcelona, but we're going to talk about that later in this video, and it sounds pretty exciting. Tip number 2 is to make the most of those later stays. So compared to the islands in the Caribbean and the Alaska ports, you generally get to stay a little bit later in those European ports because the distance between the ports is fairly short. But this is a really great chance to make the most of the ports when you're staying a little bit later. So try and have dinner on shore, especially when you're in these places that have great culinary history. So think about a dining experience at a vineyard in Italy, or how about visiting a traditional taverna in Greece? All these things are possible because you have those later stays. So make sure you do the research on the ports and have a look to see what's available. Just make sure you get back to the port in time for sail away because you don't want to be left behind. Remember, schedules in Europe generally tend to be a little bit later, so dinner is often taken much later in the day than you would see in North America. So actually just an extra few hours in these European ports often are the best hours of the day. Tip number 3 is to expect the onboard lineup to feel a little bit different. And the reason for this is that many of the sailings from Europe tend to be a lot more port heavy than the Caribbean counterparts. You still might get 1 or 2 sea days involved in your itinerary, but quite often those port days are going to be fairly long days, which generally means the events and the entertainment available on your lineup will be diminished through these port days. That often means when the sea day comes along, it's going to be packed full of things to do. So just make sure you have a look at your lineup and plan things out sensibly. If you're planning a port excursion or you think you're going to do plenty walking, you might want to make sure that you don't commit to too many activities on board that's going to exhaust you for those longer port days. And of course, when you do have those overnight stops in Ibiza and Mykonos, many people will be on land when the nighttime entertainment is on, so expect it to feel very quiet indeed. And the onboard nightlife won't necessarily have that hustle and bustle that you come to expect from Virgin Voyages. So if you are looking for livelier nightlife, that will tend to be on land rather than on the ship on those overnight days. Tip number 4 is about appreciating how exhausting these port-heavy itineraries can be. Quite often on these European itineraries, the port days will be consecutive. So you'll finish in one port, you'll end up in another the next day and another the day after that. So just be prepared. Although you're going to be looking at fantastic sights and taking in this incredible culture, you might be doing a lot of walking and a lot of activity. It's so easy when you're planning each of these ports is to think of each port as the only port you're heading to and deciding to do every activity possible. Well, my advice is simply just to pace yourself and take a look at the reviews of each port. It may be worth looking at a particular port to skip just so that you make the most of your vacation and also make the most of the ship. In the past, when we visited Rome, we've decided to stay on the ship, not least because Rome is a 90-minute bus journey away from the port, but it does mean that the ship is yours. It feels like a private yacht. So don't always feel duty bound to go out in port. If you want to stay on board the ship and make the most of the facilities while they're a little quieter, sometimes that's also the best thing to do. This also brings me on to tip number 5, and that's to realize that Europe during the summer is very hot, or at least it can be. Especially if you're heading out of Athens, the temperatures can rise to more than 40 degrees Celsius, which is over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. This is especially true in July and August, where you will see repeated severe health warnings when it comes to how hot those days are. It's been known even incredibly popular tourist attractions closed down because of the extreme temperatures, including the Acropolis in Athens. Longer walking tours in these temperatures will feel very different from those Caribbean days of lying on the beach. So make sure you take precautions by making sure you bring water on any excursions or whenever you leave the ship. Make sure you're wearing plenty sunscreen and bring cover. On those warmer days, it might be worth planning to not be outside at all during those hotter hours. If you're traveling from North America, you might be surprised at how few places in Europe have standardized air conditioning. Although very commercial places like malls and supermarkets tend to have great air conditioning, don't expect it everywhere, least of all in those smaller places like souvenir shops or smaller cafes and restaurants. So always be very mindful of the temperature and stay safe when you're out in port. And that warning is closely tied in with my next tip, which is to be aware that you are probably going to be walking more than you would expect. Many city centres in Europe are completely pedestrianised. So whereas with North American cities, you would generally expect to get everywhere by taxi, you may not be able to do that in Europe. Many of the tourist attractions in many ports will be in pedestrianised areas, and the ports in Europe tend to be, for some reason, very hilly as well, with cobblestone paths. So really make sure that you packed comfortable shoes that are worn in and have a good grip to them as well. We've seen many people slipping on cobblestones in Greece, for example, that could have been avoided if they'd just chosen to leave their flip-flops behind and wear a pair of trainers instead. You can simply ask the Sure Things team to make sure the activity that you signed up to is acceptable for your activity level. It's certainly part of their job to understand the level of accessibility required for each of these activities, so make sure you ask them all those questions in advance. Tip number 7 is knowing about your embarkation and disembarkation port before you make your travel plans. Now, if you're setting off from Barcelona, the Barcelona cruise port is actually quite close to the city centre, so you can get a taxi to the port pretty inexpensively and it won't take too long. One thing I will say about Barcelona though is that the traffic can be crazy, so try and leave a little bit earlier than you would expect, just in case there is snarled up traffic closer to the port. There are 2 ports in Barcelona that are fairly close together. One is called the World Trade Center port and the other is called the Cruise Terminal. You'll generally see the port address confirmed to you in your email from Virgin Voyages, before you head on. In Athens, however, the port is quite far from the city centre. It's actually in a town called Piraeus, which is about 40 minutes away from the city centre. Taxis are not incredibly expensive in Athens, so I wouldn't worry too much about having to stay in Piraeus, especially if you want to make the most of Athens itself and visit the Acropolis before you head off. But do make sure that you're prepared for a little bit of a journey in the morning to head onto the ship. Piraeus, the town itself, has some lovely cafes and bakeries, but it doesn't really have the sightseeing that Athens at large can have. So I would recommend staying in Athens city centre if you can. My next tip is all about logistics when it comes to currency. Now, most of the time when you're traveling in Europe, you're going to be using the euro, but not always. Both home ports, thankfully, Barcelona and Athens, do use euros, but you may end up going to ports that don't use them. So for example, if you stop off in Turkey, Egypt, or Morocco, you'll be using a different currency. It's always best to do the research to understand what currency you'll need, but credit cards are generally accepted pretty much everywhere. And if you're going to somewhere close to the cruise port, you'll generally be able to use euros anyway, although be careful that the exchange rate might not be as good as you're expecting. If your itinerary is heading up north outside of the Eurozone, so for example, if you head to the UK or Norway or Iceland, then the currency will be different again. So again, always check the local currency requirements. But on the ship, it's a little bit easier. You will never be spending anything that is not in US dollars. This will never change. If you're on a Virgin Voyages ship, every price that you see and every payment that you make will always be in US dollars. This doesn't change wherever you go. Now, although gratuities are generally taken care of as part of your plan, so you can either prepay for gratuities before you head on board, or you can pay for them on board. It simply gets added to your onboard account before you head off the ship. Again, that will be in dollars. But if you do want to personally tip any members of staff in cash as well, then you can feel free to tip in either the local currency of the port, so euros generally, or you can tip in US dollars as well. The crew will be thankful either way. Now, the last two tips are all about getting the best value sailings possible, because Europe tends to be a little bit more expensive than the North American sailings, but there are deals to be had. So tip number 9 is about choosing the shoulder seasons. What do we mean by shoulder seasons? Well, it's both the start and the end of the European season. So if you look at sailings in May, or if you look in September and October, the weather tends to be a little bit cooler, and also the school holidays haven't started yet. So the pricing for those voyages and the pricing for flights tend to be a little bit more palatable. If you're looking for a European sailing and you just want the best price possible, here's a really easy way of doing it. If you head over to vvinsider.com/book, we have a section on that page where you can filter the voyages down to those European sailings. You can also choose the dates that you're looking at. So for example, if I'm looking at the shoulder season for next year, I can choose May and September and October in 2027. Then I can sort that list of voyages by how much each of those voyages cost per night. And by doing this, I can get a list of all the best value sailings for Europe next year. And not only that, a few of these actually have extra sailor loot available on them as well. So if you have a look at this little yellow indicator, it will tell you exactly how much sailor loot you can get simply by choosing a limited view sea terrace or higher. And that's on top of any limited time promotions that Virgin Voyages are running as well. So it's a really good way of making sure you never spend too much when you're looking for one of these voyages. Just be aware, if you are heading to Europe in the shoulder season, sometimes it can be a little less crowded. So if you're looking for big thumping nightlife in Ibiza, for example, you might not get that unless you're heading in those more popular months. Also, you might get more unpredictable weather. So although the weather will be quite warm and temperate, you might see showers, rain and wind. Be aware that some tourist attractions and some port excursions might not be offered in these shoulder months as well, because there's simply not enough crowds to warrant opening up. And if you're really looking for a bargain, my final tip, tip number 10, is all about choosing those transatlantic voyages. So remember, when the season starts and when the season finishes, the ships have to get to and from Europe. And to do that, they do what's called a transatlantic repositioning voyage. This will either be from Miami or from San Juan. And there will be eastbound journeys at the end of spring, and then there will be westbound journeys at the beginning of autumn. These transatlantic voyages tend to have a lot of sea days in a row, so if you love enjoying the ship and the entertainment and the dining that's on board, and you simply want more of that, this is a really good way of doing it. But do be careful, you need to be prepared for this. You are trapped on board for those sea days, so sometimes you can get as many as 8 sea days in a row, which means that you won't see dry land for all of that time. Personally, I'm not a great fan of this. I do like a good mixture of ports, but the prices for these transatlantic voyages sometimes are the best value possible, especially if you're looking for something like a Rockstar or a Mega Rockstar suite. The price per night can be really, really good compared to those voyages that are more traditional, that have a lot more port days. These are, of course, longer voyages. Some of them can be up to 16 nights in total, but we know they definitely have their fans, and there's some people that we know do transatlantic every single year. So if that sounds interesting to you, again, head over to vvinsider.com/book, because there are some great deals to be had if you're looking for those longer repositioning voyages. Now, one of the reasons we put this video together today is because we're thinking all about Europe at the minute, because the itineraries have just been announced for 2028. And that's both Scarlet Lady and Valiant Lady. Scarlet will be based in Athens, and Valiant Lady will be based in Barcelona and somewhere else. Now, the reason I say that is because there's a gap in Valiant Lady's schedule in 2028. That's a little bit of a mystery, but we think we found the culprit. We did some digging and found that Resilient Lady is listed to be in port in Amsterdam in 2028. Well, we know Resilient Lady is not even in Europe. She's actually across in the Caribbean instead. Well, we've done a bit of digging and a bit of research, and we're pretty certain that Valiant Lady will be making Amsterdam her home port in 2028. That's really interesting because they've never home ported in Amsterdam ever before. And this could be really, really popular indeed for those of us that live in the UK, but also those other sailors that live in Western and Northern Europe as well. We of course don't have this confirmed yet, but if you stay subscribed to this channel, and if you head over to vvinsider.com, you can sign up for our email newsletter as well, and be the first to know when this information is completely confirmed. But the itineraries that could originate from Amsterdam are really interesting. We do know that other cruise lines, when they originate from Amsterdam, do things like Northern Europe journeys all the way up north to the top of Norway. That could be a really interesting Arctic cruise that we could see for the first time from Virgin Voyages. There could also be explorations into Sweden, for example, which again, we've never seen from the brand. This, of course, is all speculation and conjecture at the minute, but it's something that's really, really interesting. So if you're looking for something that's more Northern European, we're pretty certain that that's going to happen with Valiant Lady. But again, if you want to know for sure, make sure that you stay subscribed here and we'll let you know exactly when that's confirmed. Well, without playing favoritism, I just want to say sailing with Virgin Voyages in Europe are some of the best trips I have ever had. Not even just with Virgin Voyages, in general. I absolutely love those voyages, both from Barcelona and Athens on Virgin Voyages, and I can't wait to do more myself. So if you're looking at those type of voyages, we'd love to help you get that planned and booked as well. We have such extensive knowledge of not only the ships, but also the ports that you're going to be visiting in Europe as well. So if you want that expertise and that incredible knowledge behind your booking and supporting your next voyage, then head over to vvinsider.com/book. And there you'll see a huge list of reasons why trusting us with your next Virgin Voyages booking is the best way to go about it. Not only will you get that unparalleled support from the Virgin Voyages experts, but you also stand to get some free sailor loots included as well that you can spend on anything when you go on board. And also you'll be helping support the work that we do here at vvinsider.com. I'll be back next week with a Virgin Voyages Insider update, telling you all of the things that have changed across the Virgin Voyages fleet over the past couple of weeks. So you'll definitely want to tune in for that. So make sure that you stay subscribed to this channel. But until I see you next time, happy sailing.